welcome to this next episode of the Maz's Musings podcast. Today I am joined by Dan Cuterio, who is just basically the epitome of the Disney adult. Welcome back, Dan. Dan, of course, joined us earlier when he was talking about his excursion um, to Disneyland and to the D23 Expo. Yes, the much longer name, but it's the Expo. And he is joining us today because he went on another Disney excursion, this time to Marceline, Missouri, to visit basically Walt Disney's childhood stomping grounds. So, Dan, welcome aboard once again. How have you been since the last time we talked?
Been good. Thanks for having me back. I had a great time before. I'm always looking for different opportunities beyond just the parks and I mean, God knows I love the parks, but there's so much more you could do in the Disney universe. And so this was something that was on my bucket list, and I was happy to finally check it off.
All right. Well, anything else going on? I know that you are, you're back in this area in your childhood
Yeah,
stomping grounds for
that's true.
for the holiday.
Yeah.
What what do you have planned for the holiday?
I'm here in Western Massachusetts. Ludlow is my hometown, and I'm with my family. Just gonna have a pretty standard, quiet Thanksgiving day, and working from home, which is always a blessing. But yeah, I'm excited to be back.
Well, thanks very much for joining me and taking the time, especially during the during the holiday time, and obviously it's a short time with your family, so I appreciate you
Yeah,
taking a little bit of time with me.
of course.
All right, we are recording. We're obviously live. We are on Riverside. Once again, it doesn't seem that I can figure out how to make the Instagram work, but we are also on YouTube as well, so people can log on there. People who log on to Riverside will also be able to join a live chat with us here. So there may be a couple of people that pop on who may have questions and that we may take live. So depending on how this goes, we'll see. But we will just get right into our main topic, which of course is your travels to Marceline.
Donald, wake up! It's showtime! Don't forget the orchestra.
Ah, there you are. And just in time.
Mom says there's even more magical stuff now.
For those of you standing, please hold on to the handrails throughout our journey and stay clear of the doors.
Hang on to them hats and glasses, cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
And here we go!
All right. Well, we will just get right into it. Dan, I guess first, what prompted this trip? What made you decide that this was the right time and this was when you were going to make this trek to Missouri of all places?
Yeah, it actually kind of started. Well, I had like the seed planted in my head to visit Walt's childhood home for at least a few years now. But it was when I was at the D23 Expo, and you're right, it is a really big mouthful, the official name. So yes, we'll continue to call it the Expo. When I was at the Expo on the floor, the Walt Disney Hometown Museum had a presence there. So I went through a lot of the different booths and areas, and I spent some time there, and I had a really nice brief conversation with an employee from the museum who was representing it there. And I was in such a Disney high, obviously being, in an environment like that. I thought I got to make this happen. And I knew that the Disney 100, the exhibition, the official name for it, which I had seen before, I saw it in Philadelphia last year, that it was in Kansas City. So I thought maybe there's a way I can actually make this work. It's a good 3-hour flight from New York City, where I live, to Kansas City, and then from there it's another 2-hour drive to Marceline. So I had to make sure to rent a car. I don't know that there's any Ubers that are going to take me to Marceline, but I made it work, and it was pairing those two things together was awesome. I loved re-experiencing the exhibition and getting to spend a little bit more time with it. and also just seeing it in the environment it was in, which is in a train station. We know how much Walt himself loved trains,
Yes.
and his love of trains really kicked off or was sparked in Marceline. So then actually going to Marceline and going to the museum, which is in the old Marceline train station, which is the train station that Walt and his family came into when they moved to Marceline after coming from Chicago. He was born in Chicago in 1901, moved to Marceline in 1906. So he was a little young guy. And yeah, it was just an incredible experience. I knew I could make it happen. So I did it before I lost the will to do it.
Sure. I'd imagine that this is a little bit different of an experience. So many of the, quote unquote Disney experiences have a certain feel to them,
Yes. Yeah.
regardless of whether you're at a park or at a resort or on a cruise or whatever. This, I'd imagine, had a much different feel to it.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. It was no lines, man. No lines. No lines anywhere, not with the exhibit. I mean, there were plenty of people at the exhibit, but no lines there. And Marceline is this little tiny town in north central Missouri. It's just over 2,000 people. I think there were maybe three people in the museum, and I know a little bit later we're going to talk about me visiting the Disney Family Farm. So I got to go in the recreation of the barn there, which we'll talk about, and I was the only person on this entire farm. So being in this area of just like I don't know, it may sound cheesy, but I was able to just sort of stand there and kind of soak it all in and contemplate it all. And it was just we always talk about magic when we talk about Disney, but it really was a very magical experience.
Now, just in terms of the chronological order of things, did you go to the exhibition first and then to Marceline, or what was the order of
Yeah.
events here?
Yeah, it was the other way around. So
Okay.
I actually stayed in Overland Park, Kansas, which is just over the border, and which, as a side note, I was excited to check off two states, Kansas and Missouri, that I'd never been to before. And I do have one of those goals of, all 50 states. And the next day after I flew in was my birthday, and I spent that day 4 hours round trip on the highway going to Marceline, and then the next day after that, I did the Disney 100 exhibition.
That's right. I meant to, in the open, wish you happy birthday as well,
Thank
because we hadn't, seen each other, face to face, so to speak, since then.
Thanks.
So you get to the museum, and what were some of the big takeaways there? You mentioned that it is in a train station, which kind of
Yeah.
embodies one of Walt's really passions.
Yeah.
But beyond that, what were some of the big takeaways and impressions from the museum?
Yeah, I'll start by saying when I got there, first of all, I didn't expect it to be this massive museum. It was actually quite larger than I expected it to be. It does take up the entire building, but I knew that driving 4 hours round trip, I was going to just soak up every second of this experience. So when I got there, before I stepped inside, I just kind of circled the museum. It's a really beautiful building with nice flowers and a lot of just there's a beautiful clock there, and I just took a lot of photos. And a museum employee had noticed that I was doing this, and I think it was 11 a.m. and they had opened maybe an hour earlier. And when I was headed to the front door to finally go inside, she was also headed in, I think maybe to start her shift or something. And she made a comment like, "Oh, admiring the architecture, were you?" So then, like, fast forward quite a bit, and I spend nearly 2.5 hours in the museum. And at the end, I see the same woman at the main registration area, and she says, "You're still here?" So I came to realize, and she said it like the really sweet way. It wasn't like a jerk or anything, but I came to realize probably most people don't spend that much time in museum, but there's a lot to look at, and it really does. They started off by giving you just like a brief intro. So I was the only person at the time. So they gave me a little personal intro saying, basically, you're standing in the spot where Walt Disney himself and his family uh, like step through these doors and were here when they were coming in on the train from Chicago. And then you just kind of wander through all the galleries. And the museum was opened in 2001. Marceline, this was the 100th birthday for Walt Disney, and Marceline had a whole bunch of festivities happening. And one of the things they did was they opened this museum, and it's largely based on Walt's younger sister Ruth's collection.
Hmm.
So you'll see a lot of personal effects, a lot of handwritten letters. I could have spent even more time there just reading all these letters. There's a lot of information about Walt's entire family. Again, it's the Walt Disney Hometown Museum, so they want to make sure that it is, of course, largely focused on Walt, but then also his parents, Elias and Flora, and all of his siblings. He had three older brothers. Of course, we know Roy. There was also Herbert, Ray, and his younger sister, Ruth. Um, Lots of great art and models. I think they were scale models of different buildings in the Disney parks, and um, things that came from fans and merch, and just there was a piece of the Dreaming Tree which we could talk about. It was part of the farm, where Walt and Ruth used to just sit under the tree when they were kids and imagine what their futures might be like. And it was pretty incredible. They even had on display, for anyone who's listening or watching who may not know, we know that Walt was a huge fan of trains. In
Yeah.
his home property in LA, he built a train track that went around his entire property. So they had a piece of that track, it like kind of framed. It was extremely narrow. I was surprised. I was, how do you sit on that train? But it was extremely narrow. But it was really cool to see that. You learn about his life and upbringing in just the 5 or so years that he lived there. It wasn't a long time. He was there from like ages 5 through 9, I believe. But they were his most formative childhood years, and he always considered it to be his hometown. So you see his school desk from the park school where he went, and he had carved his initials in it, actually a couple of times. So that's on display, and just getting a sense of what his home life was like. They tell some really great stories about his father's frugality and um, how much their mom was just in love with the kids and was just so kind and encouraging of them. She um, to help with the just bringing money into the household, she would churn and make her own butter, which was
Wow.
apparently, I think she did a lot of different things, but that was the thing that really took off because her butter was known to be the best in all of the land, and they would go sell it around. And the father decided we can't waste this good butter, so we're not allowed to consume it in the house. It has to be just for sale. But the mom used to butter the bread with the butter and give it to the kids, butter side down, so the father wouldn't be the wiser, so he wouldn't know. So the kids would have this whole butter side down thing, like that's what they would say. Just like hearing little stories about that, like that, or the time they went to the hotel on Kansas Avenue, which is now called Main Street USA officially. They would go to a hotel and have a very fancy dinner, which isn't something they would often do because, again, Elias was very frugal. And Ruth had accidentally spilled her plate of food all over the ground or the table. And apparently the dad, Elias, just wasn't too pleased. He had saved up for this dinner and really kind of made a show of, I don't know what he said, but I imagined it was one of those "Do you think money grows on trees?" kind of conversations. And that was a story that always stuck with the family, and they talk about that in the museum. So there's a lot of these like really human moments. We think of Walt, I think, as this giant magnanimous presence even today in all of our lives because of the influence that he and his company had. But at the end of the day, he was a regular small town kid, essentially, like so many of us were.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's those little nuggets, those little anecdotes that really, you know, illustrate the humanity of
Yeah.
someone who, you know, otherwise is this, somewhat larger than life figure
Yeah.
to a lot of people. You see it a lot when, especially when people are talking about changes to the parks and well, what would Walt think about this? As if
Yes.
it's almost a semi deity, and it's
Yeah.
this is a guy who who grew up the way so many other people did and dreamed big,
Mhm.
and that's so it really kind of helps flesh out um, the understanding of who this person was. So I
Yeah,
love that anecdote about the butter and the bread. Like
right.
those little things just make someone as successful and as iconic as Walt Disney um, feel more human, honestly.
Human, yeah, and I think it all grounded him too, because he never forgot where he came from. And even though he only lived there for a few years, he would come back. The town loves him, by the way. Like that's probably goes without saying, but they love him, and they've done a lot in his honor since his death in 1966, and before then as well. There have been a couple of premieres of some sort of little known Disney films at the theater on Main Street. They renamed Kansas Avenue Main Street USA because that was the avenue that inspired Walt to create Main Street USA in the parks. And when you walk through it, it's very small. It's probably like 2 blocks. But when you walk through it, you can look at the architecture of the buildings and then compare it to the architecture of the buildings in the parks, and you definitely see a lot of resemblance. And just there weren't a lot of people out. But the one or two people who were, I got like a good afternoon, sir, kind of thing. Like I'm not in the Northeast anymore. These
A very
people,
Midwest kind of feel
exactly,
to.
exactly. It's
Yeah,
the hospitality, the humility. It was wonderful.
I love having the opportunity to see some of those the artifacts and the just the small pieces of life.
Yeah,
Obviously, we around here, one of the big celebrities, so to speak, in the Springfield area is Dr. Seuss, and the
yeah,
Dr. Seuss Museum has. It's funny because the Dr. Seuss Museum is kind of split into like Dr. Seuss stories vomited all over the first floor, and the second
yep,
floor is much more about Ted Geisel, the man,
yeah. The
and
man.
growing up in Springfield, and so I'd imagine there are a lot of parallels between those kind of approaches to these museums. At least the second floor of the Dr. Seuss Museum, and what I'm hearing from the Walt Disney Hometown Museum.
Yeah, the Hometown Museum is more like the second floor of the Dr. Seuss Museum. There isn't there's no space where kids can just like really play. It's more of like an adults museum, I would say.
Hmm.
I don't I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but talking to you now, thinking about it, they do have a giant Mickey you can take a picture with, and I certainly did. And but there's no like playrooms or anything like that. So it is a little bit more of a sophisticated take on Walt Disney. So if you're going to bring your kids, they may get bored. So something to keep in mind for anyone watching or listening. But
and that and
any
that
Disney
be
adult would love it.
that may be why someone was so surprised to have seen you there for 2+ hours.
It's true. That is true. Yeah, and at the end of it, I had a conversation with that same woman, and one of the founders of the museum was there. And I had just like a really lovely conversation, to very beautiful, wonderful women. And I happened to mention it was my birthday, and then they started singing "Happy Birthday" to me, and I was like, "Oh my god!" I don't remember the last time anyone sang "Happy Birthday" to me, and it just made me think. The Walt Disney Hometown Museum is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company. It's its own separate entity, as is the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco, which I'm yet to visit. But they're separate organizations, but they play nice with Walt Disney
Mhm.
Company, and vice versa. I think they'll share like parts of their collections and whatnot. But even though it's not part of the larger company, it just, to me, them singing "Happy Birthday" to me and just their general kindness spoke to that larger Disney ethos, of just bringing joy to each individual person. And one of the woman who made the comment about admiring the architecture and you're still here, she was wearing a vest just covered with pins, and we know how big pins are in the world of Disney.
Yes.
And she took a pin off of her vest and said to I believe she's also the CEO, the founder, um, I think we can give him this, right? And then she gave me this pin, and it says VIP guest, Walt Disney Hometown Museum, and that just completely made my day. And the image on here is kind of a famous image that you see throughout the museum. It's Walt and Roy reading a newspaper about, I believe it's their arrival to Marceline, and in the background is the museum. So the museum was opened in 2001, as I mentioned. Of course, Walt passed in 1966, so
Mhm.
so they never got to see it. But they certainly knew the building because it was the train station. So it's kind of an iconic image that you see throughout.
So you moved on from the museum to the family farm, which I know that kind of blew up the family farm in the
Oh yeah.
uh, promotion of this of this episode, but it's just a small part of the experiences you had. But I'd imagine that this was another one of those moments where you just get more of a contemplative look um, at Walt and what growing up as part of that Disney clan was like.
Yeah, it was a smaller experience, but just as meaningful, and brought you a little bit closer because it's on the Disney Family Farm. So, I believe Elias Walt's dad in Chicago, I think he had, if I'm not mistaken, a bunch of different jobs, just kind of trying to make ends meet, and nothing was really working out. So, what brought them to Missouri in the first place is that I'm sorry, Walt's uncle, so his dad's brother, lived in Missouri, was successful at what he did, and owned some property. And the family came to Marceline, where the father, Elias, thought he'd uh, try farming. I've never tried farming. I don't think it's easy. And he struggled as a farmer, but they had all these acres. I think it may have been about 40 or so acres. Had a house and a barn on that spot. And today it's all private property. There is the house. I'm not sure if it's the original house or if it was rebuilt, but it is a private home, so you can't go inside. But the private property, the owners allow people to go through, again, not in the house, but through the recreation of the barn and the property. They even have a small parking lot set up because they know, people are going to make their pilgrimages there.
Right.
And they have signs up that explain this is where the dreaming tree was, which I mentioned was this huge tree that apparently outlived its own lifespan. It wasn't supposed to live as long as it did, and then it finally, I think it was a lightning strike, finally took it down. But they saved some seeds from the tree and they planted a new one in about the same spot, another one elsewhere on the property, and then a third one, I believe, in Disneyland, in one of the Disney parks. I think it may have been Disneyland. Um, but they kind of made a point of saying, but we won't tell you which tree it is. So probably to like protect it among all the crowds of people.
Sure.
So we went into the barn in 2001, the same year they opened the museum and had the big 100th birthday celebration. The original barn was knocked out. It was gone. Walt had built a replica barn in his property in California years later, and they took the blueprints from that one, which was based on the original, to create this new one. So what you see now is a recreation of the barn that originally stood on that property. And it's this beautiful wooden building. You go inside, and they do encourage you to write on the walls. And there are some benches there that you could write on. So you bring your Sharpie. I bought a Sharpie that said Disney Family Farm on it at the museum, and looked for just a square inch of space that was left anywhere on the wall where I could write a little message because it was tough, but I found a small space. So anyone who's listening or watching, if you go to that barn, there's like a little sort of side room right next to a window on the right-hand side. Someone drew a picture of Ariel. And right under there is my message, which I wrote. It all started with imagination, then a mouse. Thanks, Walt and Roy. And I put the date, November 9th, 2024, and my initials. So that was just a cool little space. And like I said earlier, there was no one else there. It was also a very misty kind of day, so that kind of added to the magic of the whole thing. So I just took in the quiet, which is something that you're not going to get in any Disney park, and just soaked it all in, and slowly walked back to my car, and then just drove around the town a little bit looking for some other sites, like oh, this is where the park school, his school, would have been. This is where the Walt Disney Post Offices, which, by the way, is the only federal building in America that has Walt's name on it. They named it
Huh.
for him, of course. I learned in the museum that Walt had a plan to build a theme park in Marceline, which was supposed to be this this land where people were going to go and experience what kind of small town living is like. He was looking into the future. We know he liked to do that with his concepts for Epcot and all of that. So I think he was thinking that years from now, people wouldn't know what it's like to live around, just these humble locations and farm animals and all of that. So it was meant to be kind of this, I guess, agricultural sort of park, and it just never really quite took off.
It's
Um,
kind of sounds almost like a um, Epcot in reverse.
in a way, yeah, yeah, yeah. It made me think of Old Sturbridge Village, which I know you
Mm,
would know.
yep.
Anyone who's from the western or central Massachusetts area is familiar with Old Sturbridge Village. It's this living history museum. So I think that's kind of what he was thinking.
Well, and then you headed 2 hours back,
Yeah,
and you were in Kansas City for the Disney 100 exhibition in
yeah.
Kansas City, correct?
Yeah, and right before I
And
went to that, I had some time to kill, so I just drove around. I found the family home because after Marceline, they moved to Kansas City, so I saw the house, which is a private home. It's in a neighborhood that's a bit run down, and I did wonder, looking at it, if these people even know the history of the home that they're living in. But then I saw, when you look close, there's a bird bath on the front yard, and there's a little Mickey Mouse on in the bird bath. So
I
I
I
think they're
recall
aware.
you, yeah, I recall you sharing that picture with me
Yeah.
when you were when you were there.
I tried to be very covert about it because I'm sure they're used to people taking pictures of their house, but it is a little weird taking a picture of someone's private home. And then I found the Laugh-O-Gram Film Studios, which was Walt Disney's first animation studio, and that was not far from that home. It's an old building that is closed down. There is a nonprofit, I believe they're called Thank You Walt Disney, and they're trying to bring it back. Right now, it has like "Do Not Enter" signs on it. It looks like it's condemned or something, but they want to bring it back and turn it into an educational space for artists in Walt's name, essentially. So hopefully they have luck with that. And that was a good 30 minutes or so of just sort of driving around looking for those little sites before I made my way to Union Station for the exhibition.
Sure. And you mentioned that, of course, the exhibition at Union Station, at a train station once again, which is,
Yeah.
and I believe I saw that you mentioned somewhere that Kansas City really is still a railroad kind of city.
It definitely feels that way. The Union Station itself is a whole complex of different things now. You definitely pass through it on the train as well, but beyond that, there's like museums, and I think there was an aquarium, just a lot of different things. It's become a big hub. There's theaters there. So I you definitely get the sense that it's a railroad city, but maybe some of that is kind of like gone by the wayside a little bit, and they had to repurpose the space in all these other ways as well.
Sure. Okay, so now let's get into the D100 or the Disney 100. And of course, last time you broke out some Mickey ears, so I'm going to break out
Nice.
my Disney 100 Mickey ears
Nice.
for this.
Love it.
I don't know. I don't think that they quite match my whole aesthetic, but we'll
Maybe
go
more
with
for Megan, but or
it.
or Eileen, but they do look good on you.
So, I have not seen this exhibition. So, if you could kind of run through just obviously the basics of it, but then
Yeah,
this is not your first time having been to this
right.
exhibition. So, was there anything that caught you this time that that maybe you didn't see or didn't quite appreciate the last time?
Yeah, so going back a little bit for anyone who's not familiar, it's called Disney 100 colon the exhibition. I believe it is the largest exhibition that the Walt Disney Archives has ever put on, and this was done for Disney's 100th anniversary last year in 2023. It was the company was founded in October 16th, 2023, and you do see the contract on display at the exhibition between Walt and Margaret Winkler out of New York, who produced animated films, and with the date on there. So that was pretty cool. And it's a traveling exhibition, so they have a US leg and an international leg. It's meant to run for 5 years, so there's another 4 or so years left. Started in Philadelphia. I asked the kind women at the museum if they knew why Philadelphia. They said we have no idea. Like there was no connection between Philadelphia and Walt. But then it went to Chicago, Walt's birth city, and now it's in Kansas City. And I don't believe I may be mistaken, but I don't believe they've announced the next U.S. city. The international one is in Seoul, South Korea, right now. And it just extended in Kansas City, so it's going until January 5th. It was supposed to close this month. So anyone who's interested in recreating this trip, you have until January 5th. Check out the exhibit, go to Marceline, check out the museum, and yeah, I loved it. It's 10 galleries, and all the galleries are themed differently. So they made a very conscious effort not to do a timeline of the company's history. So they wanted to do it by theme. The first gallery you walk into, really, it kind of timeline wise, it is the earliest years. It's the founding of the company. The One of my favorite things, excuse me, that they have on display is the megaphone that Walt used when he was running Laugh-O-Gram, that studio I mentioned in Kansas City. So you can sort of imagine him on set of these short films that he was making, kind of screaming into the megaphone so his actors could hear him, and has the Laugh-O-Gram logo on it. And they have the contract. But then some of these other rooms that they have, these galleries, are themed around the importance of story, which we know is a huge part of the Disney brand, the importance of character and how to really round out characters. There was one specifically about, I believe it was adventure and discovery, another one about innovations. So you go into more of the Imagineering stuff. Disney as a company created a lot of things that some people may not even be aware of. Like I did not know that they created the concept of storyboarding movies, which is something that's just commonplace for all movies now. But they started
Right.
it with their animated films. They created audio animatronics, which I think everyone probably knows. One of the things they have on display, and I think this is the original. I hope it's the original. Waltz, I believe in France, ended up bringing back home with him a bird cage with a couple of animatronic birds in it, and he gave it to his employees. I don't know if they were called Imagineers at the time, and basically said, "Take this apart and figure out how it works." And that was the beginning of audio animatronics and how it all kind of came to be. So they have on display this bird cage with the two birds in it, and it's dated gold a Gilded Age era, so late 19th century. So it very well could be the original, as far as I know. And they have some other cool things on there. Like there's a gallery dedicated to music and sound. One of my favorite things they have is the chimes that they use to reproduce Tinker Bell's sound. So as she's flying through the air, they're like "Tit, tit, 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 tit." um, they have those chimes, and it's the first time that they're on display. It's, I think, a relatively new um, uh, addition to the archives collection, so they have it on display. They also have the whistle that was used for Steamboat Willie, if you imagine that like whistle sound of so I really geek out, obviously, over a lot of these like classic, going back historic stuff. But then they have a lot of really cool stuff that's more modern day. You can sit there and listen to singers singing "Let It Go" in a ton of different languages. So you get to see like the international appeal of a lot of this stuff and how it all kind of comes together. So yeah, just a great time. I was solo this time. I went with a friend in Philadelphia last time, and we kind of did our separate things. But this time, I didn't feel like I had to wait for anyone or anyone had to wait for me, so I could really spend as much time as I wanted. And that was another 2.5 hours or so. It was awesome. The one thing I noticed is that the gift shop was a lot smaller in Kansas City, but they did have some items that were branded Disney 100 Exhibition and Kansas City, kind of like a co-brand thing, which is kind of cool.
So was it consistent throughout? There wasn't anything that was rotating in this
No,
exhibition.
no, same stuff. They cover all aspects of the Walt Disney Company. So a lot of parks stuff, Walt Disney Animation films, Marvel, Star Wars, Nat Geo. They had a whole area, a themed gallery around the kind of the world around you and how Walt was very much inspired by nature, and so Nat Geo kind of had a presence there. Um, but I got to spend some more time with different items that maybe I didn't spend as much time with the first time, and other things I was rediscovering that I got to spend more time with. They have a lot of costumes on display. They have a whole thing for Cruella and in the story, and I'm sorry, in the character gallery. So you get to see sort of how this character of Cruella Deville kind of came to be. I don't know how they chose Cruella out of the thousands of characters, but it was very interesting to kind of see her evolution and the costume that Emma Stone wore in the movie Cruella and all of that. A lot of different video displays and interactive things you can kind of play around with. They have the prop storybooks from Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella and Hocus Pocus, that they used on film. Um, the glass slipper that was used in the more recent Cinderella movie from a few years ago, and just a lot of really cool stuff there. There's unlike the Walt Disney Hometown Museum, which I mentioned feels more adult oriented. This one definitely has something for everybody, and so there are a lot of kids around, and it's always still fun to see things kind of through their eyes too.
Excellent. So was there anything else from this particular trip that stood out before you headed back to New York?
Yeah, and in Marceline, I mentioned Walt and Roy had a great amount of affection for the town and would come back every now and then. When they named the elementary school after Walt, they came for, I believe, for that. They named a municipal park and swimming pool after him, so they came for that kind of ribbon cutting. Uh, there was one thing else that I learned that I thought was very interesting. I mentioned that Walt wanted to build a park there. So even though that didn't happen, he did bring a little bit of Disneyland to Marceline. Uh, Disneyland has the Autopia ride.
Hmm.
Originally, apparently, I don't know the full story here, but there was a ride that was similar, and it was called. I don't think we're allowed to say this now, but it was called Midget Autopia. Just so you know, that's not my word, that's theirs. It was called Midget Autopia, and they do have one of the cars on display at the museum. And what he did was the ride was eventually retired from Disneyland and run there, I think, for 10 years. And so he picked up the ride, brought it to Marceline, and I believe it was in the Walt Disney Municipal Park, if not another park that they have there. And they had it as a park ride that any kid in Marceline or the surrounding area could get a little taste of Disneyland. And it ran for 11 years. They make a point of saying it ran there longer, a year longer than did at Disneyland, until it started cannibalizing itself, the ride, which sounds disgusting. But what that ultimately means was the cars were starting to break down, so they had to take parts from some cars to fix other cars, and it got to a point where it just wasn't sustainable anymore, so they took down the ride. But they are trying to bring it back, and they do have like jars in the museum where you could donate a few bucks. I put a few bucks in there to try to restore the ride and bring it back to the town.
Well, not to be not that's not at all what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry. Once you returned home, obviously you were not just sitting around waiting for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
You recently also went to the Museum of Broadway.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I
Which of course you have an affinity for, not only living in New York City, but you, as long as I've known you, you've been a fan of film and the stage, and obviously that continues now
yeah.
in a professional capacity too.
Yep.
But this is honestly, this is something that I'd never heard of before. I guess
Mhm.
I'm not surprised to hear that there's a museum of Broadway, but I guess I'm a little surprised to hear it's only its second anniversary.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of surprising to think that there wasn't a permanent museum to Broadway. I work on Broadway, and before I worked on Broadway, I'd been volunteering. I continue to as an usher, and have been doing that for about a decade at different off Broadway and some Broadway shows, and just am a huge lover of theater. So they built this museum, and I was there 2 years ago on its opening day, and without realizing it, when I went back recently this month, it was their second anniversary. So for whatever reason, I keep going back on the day, the anniversary of this museum. And they're currently celebrating Disney on Broadway's 30th anniversary. So Disney on Broadway started with Beauty and the Beast, which was, of course, a smash hit, and they've seen a whole host of shows. Broadway's seen a whole host of shows ever since, with The Lion King, of course, which is still running, Aladdin, which is still running 10 years later. Frozen, they've had Newsies, Mary Poppins, Tarzan, a bunch of others, and then and they also cover not just Broadway but regional productions. I just saw Hercules in at a regional theater in New Jersey last year. So cross their fingers that that makes its way to Broadway. They do the cruise line productions and international productions. They're kind of all over the place,
Mhm.
which is really cool. And in this particular exhibit, it's not a huge space, but they have a lot of costumes on display from Mary Poppins, Frozen, Lion King, Newsies, Aladdin, and others, and a couple of prominent photo ops. There's one where it's Lion King themed. You can hold up Simba, do that whole thing. They have one with a magic lamp from Aladdin. I doubt it's an actual prop from the show, because they do let you handle it. You can rub it and just do a photo op with it. They have some QR codes where you can download some filters and that are Aladdin and Lion King themed. So it was just a cool experience walking through that. They do have other Disney on Broadway elements throughout the museum, particularly for Lion King, and kind of delving into its history, with the incredible Julie Taymor, and how she brought that to life and really brought a lot of new and fresh imagination to that story. So yeah, it was a really cool thing. I'm not quite sure how long that's lasting, but anyone who's in New York, definitely worth checking out. The whole museum is fantastic. It's like a cross between being a serious museum that gives you like real Broadway history, lots of context around shows and the influence of theater on society, and also being one of those Instagram museums in a way. So there's a lot of incredible photo ops. I believe all the spaces are designed, or many of them, by actual Tony nominated and Tony winning set designers. So they really do it up, and it's an incredible space. And right there in the heart of Times Square, so you can't miss it.
Well, this coming weekend, Eileen and I are actually taking Megan and our in-laws to see The Lion King
Nice.
at the Bushnell in Hartford. So
Okay.
I've never been to a Broadway show. I don't think Eileen has either. So this is kind of our toe in the water. This will
Nice.
actually be our second time seeing The Lion King. We've also seen Hamilton, also at the Bushnell.
Nice.
Um, so we're warming up. You had said in the first podcast that we did that you spent the first part of your life, Disney equals evil.
Yeah.
Um, that's the way that I feel about New York City. So I've never been there, because I just have this uh, just this repulsion. Like I just can't bring myself to bring myself there, and perhaps that's my regional sports
Hmm. Could
bias
be.
that is seeping into other parts of my life. Um, maybe it's just that maybe it's just that it's so peoply, and there's only one
Yeah,
place on this planet that I'm okay with it being super peoply, and that's Disney.
Disney. Yeah.
Who knows? But
I you know, I
uh,
can I can imagine you walking through the streets of New York and cursing every corner as you go. So I think you're right. I think your inclination is right. It is I love New York. I actually am a I have my tour guide, my sightseeing guide license. I can give you a great tour of New York, but I don't think it's not a city for everyone. I don't think it's probably a city for you, but you should definitely come visit and just take in some of it. We don't have a lot of Disney stuff in New York, which is something I think a lot about, especially lately, being a city of the size that it is. But we have a couple things. So the Disney just christened its newest ship, the Treasure,
yes.
and they did it in New York. And I didn't realize they were doing it in New York. Otherwise, I would have canceled my plans with my friends that night and gone to the cruise because they did a whole like drone show. It looked incredible. But I happened to walk from my office to the pier area, not even thinking that the ship might be there. And then I saw the ship, and I just, being the Disney nerd that I am, I got on kind of an elevated platform and I just stared at it for like 10 minutes, wishing I have a friend who's on it right now, actually, which
Really?
as part of the dress rehearsal, they always do a dress rehearsal cruise before they kind of open it to the public. And then the very next day, I just needed to kind of get away from it all. So I walked to Times Square and went to the Disney store, the 2 levels, just to be around the Disney of it all. And that immediately kind of lowers my blood pressure.
Man, the Treasure looks incredible. A friend
It
of
does,
mine
yeah.
was actually able to be at that christening, and
Oh, nice.
got to walk around and do the preview. So it just looks absolutely incredible, and
It
we'll
does.
actually be talking with her in an upcoming episode about that,
Nice.
and about her first trip to Disneyland.
Oh,
So
cool.
she's been a diehard Disney World person as long as I've known her. She admitted it felt like cheating.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that'll be a fun a fun conversation as well. And of course, it's
Awesome.
going to then make me want to go to Disneyland, which
Yeah, yeah,
Megan's got to be old enough for that plane ride first.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And the plane ride's gotten shorter, I have to say. Like in all the times I've gone to California, it was a good 6 hours. Now it's about 5 hours. So I don't know if the flights are getting faster or if the country is just compressing. but but it's actually not as bad of a ride. I mean, maybe for a little kid. What I will say to anyone who is more of a Walt Disney World person who's experiencing Disneyland for the first time, just remember that it's 2 parks. It's Disneyland and California Adventure. It's not the 4 parks of Disney World, and it is smaller. So that's the one thing everyone always says about Disneyland. It's smaller, but smaller doesn't mean worse. It's
Right.
I loved it. Like we talked about the last time I was on, it was the only park that Walt knew. He had an apartment there. I definitely encourage anybody to take the Main Street. I don't remember the exact name. I think it's called the Main Street Tour, Main Street something tour, because at the end of that tour, you will get to go into Walt's apartment and experience that, which is really cool. Which is otherwise not open to the public unless you're on this tour. But I love it, and I am hoping to go back to Disney World because it's been a while. In fact, I have no plans officially to try out Destination D23. They just unveiled dates and all of that for that in Florida, but I did block off my calendar just in case. I would love to do that, and also take in some park days in Orlando. So we'll see. We'll see.
All right. Well, I think that this is going to wrap up the Disney related portion of this show. I'm glad that you were able to take a few minutes to talk with me about all of this,
Yeah,
and
thank you.
yeah, it's been great. I mean, I like I said, it's always great to be able to find these little pieces and learn a little bit more about the people who create all
Yeah.
of the things that we love, and really some of the things that were the bedrock of um, that they built everything off of. So
Right. Yeah, I love all things history, Disney history, and Imagineering. I really, really want to try to get myself next year to the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco and experience that also. So, and I am very excited to share it all with you and your listeners and viewers. So, thank you so much for having me.
well, thank you.
Now I can't do any more damage around this popsicle stand.
So long, partner.
See you real soon.
All right, Dan. Well, I'm sure we are going to see you real soon, but
Yep.
is there any other adventures, any other planned trips or anything that you've got? I know that you've said that you've got the travel itch again. So anything
I
on your
do, I
horizon?
do. Yeah, it's I need to do that Walt Disney Family Museum. I really, really want to do a Disney cruise to Alaska. So I'm planting that seed out in the world. If anyone wants to do a Disney cruise, not that I wouldn't go solo, it's just really expensive. So we could be travel buddies.
Man, Alaska is on our list as well. It's funny. Eileen was talking about when we go to Disneyland. Well, then it's not that long of a plane ride to Vancouver, and then we could hop on the boat and or on
That's
the
true.
ship and get going. And just obviously that is such a pipe dream, but
It doesn't
but
have to be. It doesn't have to be. You just got to make it happen. And I believe it's the Disney Wonder is the ship that does the Alaska cruises, which was the first ship I sailed on. It's a great little ship. I loved it.
Well, again, thank you very much for joining me. I hope
Thank
that
you.
you have a great Thanksgiving and that you and your family have great holidays. I'm sure that I'll talk to you between now and then, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure when the next time I'll necessarily see your face will be. So
Right, right.
wanted to say that, and yeah, I know that. We'll talk again soon. We're always talking Disney one way or the
Yeah.
other. But if there's any other, I think I just lost Dan. So I guess we will just move right into the end of our episode. But before we wrap up, Dan obviously took a minute or two with us to talk about all of this stuff. But you know what else only takes a minute or two and is Disney related? Well, that's getting your free vacation quote from We Do Travel Right, which will offer the concierge level service of the dining team, one-on-one support from an agent. They also have seminars and study halls so that you can understand the ins and outs of how you can get around these parks, etc. And all of this stuff is free. Disney or cruise lines or what have you, whether it's Universal or all inclusives, all of these different companies pay the agents for you. So they pay We Do Travel Right. And why do they pay We Do Travel Right? Because you are already paying for the use of an agent, whether you use the agent or not. So it only makes sense to use the agent. So if you want to get your next magical vacation started, just go to wedotravelright.com/Mazza. That's wedotravelright.com/MAZA and get your free quote. It's completely obligation free. Oh, and head to We Do Travel Right and their social media, and you'll find information. They're going to be having a very cool seminar with Adventures by Disney coming up. So be sure to check them out for that, which it sounds like an awesome seminar. You'll get a lot of cool experience, a lot of cool information on experiences that you can have through that. So with that said, we are going to wrap this episode. And like I said, I want to thank Dan for joining me on this edition of the podcast. I want to thank anybody who watched this live stream and thank everybody who has taken the time to listen to this episode afterwards. All of your listenership and all of your support is very much appreciated. If you would like to support the podcast, you can like us on social media. You can interact with us on social media, comments and sending messages. You can also rate or review on whatever podcatcher you're using. All of this stuff kind of gets us in front of more people so that we can spread more of the positivity that we're trying to do here with this podcast, and everybody can just have a little bit more fun. Like I've said before, if somebody can take 45 minutes to an hour to listen to this show and maybe feel a little bit better or learn something, it's all good. It's all good. So you can reach out to us directly at mazasmusings@gmail.com. You can also go to mazasmusings.wordpress.com to find out more information about the podcast. Listen to past episodes and find past episodes. You can see some past episodes if there's a video element to them. You can also find us on social media, Facebook, we're the Maz's Musings Podcast. You can also find us on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter at Maz's Musings Pod. We're also on Blue Sky, which has this big long thing, but you can find us there as well. We are also doing a little bit of stuff with TikTok, which is Maz's Musings Podcast. All of those are ways that you can connect with us, and we'd love to hear from you. If you have ideas for future podcasts, if you'd like to collaborate on something, if you just want to say, hey, I really like this, or hey, maybe you could do this instead, I'm open to all of it. I have some really exciting things lined up for the next few weeks. I talked about how Emily is going to be joining me to talk about her Disneyland trip and also her experiences on the Treasure. Emily, of course, is from We Do Travel Right. She is the founder and president of We Do Travel Right. And we also have a couple other irons in the fire, nothing that I'm quite ready to announce quite yet. But if you want the latest information on the podcast, you can just sign up for our newsletter. You can go to the website or find links to how to sign up for the newsletter on our social media. So, again, thank you everybody who has listened to this podcast, who has joined us on this live stream. I really appreciate all of it. And with Thanksgiving coming up, I want to say how thankful I am for everybody who has supported us. And have a great weekend and a great week.